With Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 being great successes for Capcom and the PlayStation, they chose to outsource a side project idea after that of Resident Evil Survivor, which was met with pretty negative reviews and poor sales. It was something different with a first-person perspective and new setting and characters, with the original intent being to give it an arcade feel with the use of a light gun controller, but the North American release was only compatible with the PlayStation controller. It was the first real misstep for the Resident Evil series, but they didn't invest too much time and money into it to have it affect them that much. It was a side project after all. Survivor had its Japanese release in January of 2000, its European release in March of 2000, and its North American release all the way in August of 2000. During the production of Resident Evil 3, there were a handful of different teams working on different ideas for the series. Resident Evil was bringing in money, so naturally, Capcom wanted to capitalize on this and get some game releases out there for the fans. Survivor was mostly outsourced, with one of the Capcom production studios overseeing the project. Another team was working on Resident Evil 3 Nemesis to be the next main numbered entry on the PlayStation. Another was working on a concept for a game called Resident Evil 0 for the Nintendo 64, and yet another team went to work on a spin-off game for the Sega Dreamcast, with more outsourced development help from TOS and Nextech. There have been some conflicting reports as to whether or not this spin-off game was originally supposed to be Resident Evil 3, as there was speculation that Sony paid off Capcom in order to keep the 3 in the title for Nemesis, as it was a PlayStation release. However, Shinji Mikami himself has stated that the 3 in the title was always meant to be for the PlayStation, as it would keep the consistency of 1, 2, and 3 all being on the same system. But Jill Valentine originally wasn't supposed to be the focus of Resident Evil 3. Jill was actually going to be the main character of this Dreamcast spin-off game. In an interview with graphics designer Satoshi Nakai, it was going to follow Jill traveling to Europe to explore the backstory of Umbrella, its founders, and the progenitor virus, the precursor to the T-virus. The villains were to be Hilbert and Hilda Kruger, the children of a Wehrmacht officer who fled Nazi Germany to an island via a U-boat. As we all know now, Resident Evil 3 had a bit of a rocky development, and it was ultimately decided to make Jill the protagonist there, with her trying to escape the outbreak in Raccoon City before it is destroyed. So that left things open for this Dreamcast title. What they chose to do instead was to continue the story of Claire Redfield, as her storyline was left open at the end of Resident Evil 2. The whole idea with Hilbert and Hilda and Nazi Germany were completely dropped, but the game taking place far away from Raccoon City was kept intact. And in keeping with tradition of having a different director for each release thus far, Hiroki Kato was hired to take the reins for this new game, as he was a system planner for Resident Evil 1. Shinji Mikami remained as the producer, and a team of 6 different writers were brought in to write the story, one being RE2 savior Noboru Sugimura, who had also actually worked on Survivor's story as well. The 6th generation of consoles kicked off with the release of the Sega Dreamcast in late 1998 and 1999, as Sega's successor to the Saturn. Resident Evil 2 and 3 were both ported to it, but the decision to have this spin-off game be a Dreamcast exclusive was eventually made. Shinji Mikami has also claimed that he knew nothing of this at the time. But the Dreamcast was simply a more powerful system than any of the other systems out at the time, which were Sony's PlayStation and the Nintendo 64, both pretty old systems at this point. The Sega Saturn couldn't keep up with those two in sales, especially the PlayStation, which absolutely dominated the 5th gen. So hopes for the Dreamcast were high, as they got the jump on a more powerful system before Sony and Nintendo did. And thus, on February 3rd, 2000, Biohazard Code Veronica was released in Japan for the Dreamcast, only 1 week after the Japanese release of Biohazard Survivor on the PlayStation. Code Veronica found its North American release for the Dreamcast roughly 4 weeks later on February 29th, 2000. Yeah, it's a leap year game. And then on May 26, 2000 in Europe. So, in regards to North America, Code Veronica had its release almost half a year before Survivor, making this the first spin-off game for the series there. So, let's see what Code Veronica is all about as we check out the box art and the manual, and like usual, the first part of the game, pretending we're back in early 2000. For For the Japanese cover, we get kind of a down-up angle of close-ups of the Redfield siblings, Claire and Chris, with an ominous-looking castle in the background. Perhaps this castle will be akin to the Spencer Mansion, harkening back to the meaning of the name Resident Evil. But also, isn't that kind of a surprise that Chris is pictured here? It's time for some brief spoilers for the ends of RE1, 2, and 3 here, but the last time we saw Chris, it was him escaping the Spencer Mansion at the end of RE1, along with Jill, Barry, Rebecca, and Brad, at least in the canonical ending. RE2 is all about Claire searching for his whereabouts, and at the end of the game, she is continuing on with her journey to find him. You do encounter Chris's diary in the STARS office in RE2, where he states that he will be going to Europe with Jill and Barry to try and expose Umbrella for everything, and that he specifically is not telling Claire because it could put her in danger. Yeah, we wouldn't want Claire to be in danger now, would we? So we know he's alive and all, but Claire hasn't been able to track him down. And then at the end of RE3, Raccoon City was completely annihilated from existence. The North American and European covers for Resident Evil Code Veronica are basically the same, with a different angle of Claire and Chris. And I gotta say, they look quite good here. Also of note, Chris is still in his RPD STARS uniform. Alright, on to the prologue and the manual to see what we're in for here. The Midwestern town of Raccoon City was completely decimated by the T-virus outbreak, an incident instigated by the international corporation Umbrella. Claire Redfield, who traveled to Raccoon City in search of her lost brother Chris, managed to escape the city along with rookie police officer Leon S. Kennedy. But their ordeal is only a prelude of things to come. Now, 3 months later. Okay, so nothing we didn't know there. It basically just recaps the end of RE2 and 3. And we do get some character profiles here. Claire's inquisitive bent makes her more than just an ordinary college student who loves riding motorcycles. She went to Raccoon City in search of her brother Chris, who was missing under mysterious circumstances. But almost immediately, she became involved in a series of eerie incidents engineered by the Umbrella Corporation. Teaming up with rookie cop Leon S. Kennedy, Claire managed to escape the city. 3 months later, she now heads to Europe, following up on clues about Chris. However, she is soon caught by the Umbrella Corporation and transferred to the corporation's prison on an isolated island. Wow, well that was abrupt. We went from hearing the exact same spiel again of her looking for Chris to all of a sudden she's in an Umbrella prison on an island who knows where. I think it's safe to assume that this game will take place on that prison island then. Chris Redfield is a member of Special Tactics Force STARS. Chris is tough with a will of iron and a body of steel. He is good at handling firearms. A former Air Force pilot, he's a top-notch airman. After solving the Mansion incident, he is transferred to Europe with his team members Jill and Barry to seek the truth. The whole thing with STARS going to Europe can be a bit confusing, especially with the events of RE3 being only about Jill and Brad back in Raccoon City. We don't really know exactly what happened there in Europe. The Spencer Mansion events were in late July of 1998, and then Raccoon City was destroyed on October 1st, 1998. So, stuff happened in August and September. But, if you do find Jill's diary in RE3, she does kind of clarify a few things and explains why she stays behind. But then we get a look at a brand new character here. Steve Burnside is a good-hearted kid, though young and often reckless. He was captured with his father and held in an Umbrella prison on an isolated island. He has bad feelings toward his family, though exactly why is a mystery. During a prison raid by an unknown organization, he escaped in the chaos. Steve now meets up with Claire and their adventure begins. So, okay, this confirms that the game will be taking place on this prison island, although it says that Steve meets up with Claire with no mention of Chris. So will Chris be at this prison island too? Alright, that does it for the manual. Let's see what Code Veronica is all about. But whoa, wait, even before going to select a new game, is that Wesker in the background? Nobody else pulls off shades like that, so apparently he is indeed alive? Oh, okay, let's do this.
Resident Evil.
identification number is WKD4496. Welcome to your new home.
Her name is Claire Redfield. We caught her trespassing in our Paraspectre facility 10 days ago. She apparently infiltrated the complex looking for her lost brother, Chris Redfield, one of the surviving members of RPD's famous STARS teams. Don't move.
Wow, what a sequence. This is straight out of an action movie at this point. What is even going on here? We have Claire outrunning helicopter gunfire, diving down steps, being held at gunpoint by dozens of Umbrella soldiers, before she catches her gun mid-fall to explode gas canisters behind them. It's definitely a new direction to take the series, that's for sure. It's been said that this intro sequence was inspired by The Matrix and Hong Kong director John Woo, who was recently coming off of some successful big action thrillers of Broken Arrow and Face Off. What's also interesting is that John Woo directed another movie in the year 2000, Mission Impossible 2. This intro scene feels more like Mission Impossible than any of those, and especially anything we've seen in the Resident Evil series thus far. Claire is basically Ethan Hunt here, and that could be a bit jarring for some fans. She was just a college student who liked riding motorcycles before, so I guess the Raccoon City incident really changed her. Also, Claire here is once again voiced by Allison Court, returning from RE2. But the other main thing to notice here is how good this actually looks. Keep in mind, this was in 2000, so you were really only able to compare it to other cutscenes and games from the PlayStation and Nintendo 64, and this looks far better than anything on those systems, at least in terms of graphical capability. Preferring one graphical style over another is subjective, though. By the end of the sequence, Claire appears to be captured by an Umbrella commander and put in prison. After some time has passed, we find Claire in a jail cell when a mysterious figure approaches. The game tells you to equip a lighter to see who it is, and... oh, it's just the man who we saw capture her just seconds ago. Billy D. Williams himself. He decides to let Claire free as he tells her the prison has been taken over, and he seems completely drained of hope.
Go on. Get out of here. This place is finished. I don't know, it might have been a special forces team. But in any case, this prison's been taken over. Troops have been wiped out.
What are you saying?
You got a lot of guts coming here, after what you pulled.
You may as well know you have no chance of getting off this island.
And what about you? What are you going to do?
Don't worry about me.
There's no point in leaving her locked up, so your game just begins as he just sits there. And just like with RE3, you may notice that you are also not given a character selection and must be Claire. The box art sorta gives off the impression that you choose between Claire or Chris, but you just had to play the game to see. Right away, everything is presented in the usual familiar way, with one slight change. The camera angles are only slightly fixed. They now shift in a dynamic way to follow Claire as if they are actually a movable security camera. Also, the backgrounds are now fully in 3D instead of being pre-rendered. And yeah, I think they pulled it off quite well too. They look great. So you pick up some bullets, a green herb, and a knife, and see that all too familiar inventory screen, complete with the ECG meter and menu sound effects, which is something I haven't mentioned in any of these videos yet. These sounds are pretty iconic to the series. After your first door loading screen, things are starting to feel like we're back to some classic Resident Evil. By leaving the prison area and going up the steps, it is presented in a much slower, tension-filled way, complete with the sound of a heartbeat. You have no idea what you're about to encounter. You end up in a cemetery at night during a rainstorm as you see a totaled transport truck. All of a sudden, it explodes as a zombie falls out and begins to approach you. Just when Claire thought she was out of the zombie outbreak, they pull her back in. But what's this? Zombies start crawling right out of the ground too. Well, that's new. Were they recently buried after being infected, or can the T-virus infect buried corpses now too? You become surrounded, only having a knife with you. If you manage to make it out alive and escape the cemetery, you are instantly hit with a spotlight from a guard tower and shot at by somebody. In a cutscene, Claire finds a gun and shoots out the spotlight as the shooter reveals he thought he was shooting at zombies, not Claire in particular.
Don't shoot!
Who are you?
Huh? You're not a zombie. Well, great. Wait right there. I'm coming over.
This here is Steve that we learned about from the manual, and he is sorry.
Sorry about that little misunderstanding, but I thought you were another one of those monsters.
Shut up. Make one wrong move and I'll shoot.
Relax, beautiful. I said I was sorry.
He reveals that he was also a prisoner and is glad to hear that Claire is not from Umbrella. He tells her there's an airport nearby and then cockily tells her that he doesn't want her following him because she'd slow him down.
I don't want you following me, lady. You'll only slow me down.
Bro, did you even see that intro scene? Because she can outrun helicopter fire now. So he just leaves, and you're free to explore, now equipped with a handgun at least, and the story kicks off from here. Your goal is to escape Rockford Island and finally locate Chris's whereabouts. And without spoiling more of the story, it goes in some real crazy territories once you make it to the palace. The prison area is just the first part, but this game gets pretty bonkers. Whether the story is for you or not, Code Veronica certainly has a unique feel to it, especially compared to the familiar zombie outbreak story in RE1, 2, and 3. Because you're still solving puzzles, engaging in inventory and ammo management, using ink ribbons on typewriters, finding item boxes, all that RE good stuff. And one real cool addition that I haven't personally experienced myself is the utilization of the Dreamcast controller having a tiny screen in the middle to show you your current health condition just by looking down. It's a neat little quick reference thing to see if you're okay instead of requiring you to pause the game to check. As far as the controls themselves on this version, I hear they're pretty polarizing. Because, yeah, I've never actually played the Dreamcast version of Code Veronica myself. But throughout the game, there are definitely some story revelations, surprises, interesting ideas, and a pretty wacky conclusion. Yeah, Code Veronica is a weird one, and it tends to receive an equal amount of praise and hate. After its release, it was decided that Code Veronica should not remain exclusive to the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast may have kicked off the 6th generation of consoles, but ultimately, it did not perform nearly as well as Sega had hoped. As of 2002, it only ended up selling a little over 9 million copies. Sony's PlayStation 2 finally saw its initial release in March of 2000 in Japan, and, well, even to this day, it remains to be the best-selling video game console of all time. For comparison's sake, the PlayStation 2 sold 17 times as many consoles as the Dreamcast did. Sega eventually dropped out of the console market entirely because of this, so the Dreamcast was their swan song. It was all on Sony and Nintendo now, with newcomer Microsoft entering the market by the end of 2001. So it just made business sense to port Code Veronica over to the PlayStation 2 as well, as most Resident Evil fans were most likely buying a PlayStation 2. So they chose to add some more cinematic sequences, cleaned up some character models and graphics, and renamed this new release Code Veronica X. CVX saw its release for the PlayStation 2 and the Dreamcast even, in Japan on March 22nd, 2001, over a year after the original release. The PS2 release came out in North America in August of 2001, and then in Europe in September 2001. But that's not even it for ports. Just like with RE2 and 3, Code Veronica X was ported to the GameCube in late 2003, early 2004, and this version was actually the first one I played. Many years later in 2011, CVX was also ported to the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and even the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 in 2017 and 2019 respectively, but only in Europe. Code Veronica may not have gotten a number in the title, but the story here is central to the overall saga of Resident Evil. It has the reputation of being a spin-off title, but that's not really true. You are meant to play this after RE3 if you want to get the complete story. It does indeed continue Claire and Chris's story, and yes, even Albert Wesker. I think this game could have been called Resident Evil 4 Code Veronica, and everybody would have been okay with it. But Capcom didn't want to release two main numbered entries so close together, and yeah, I could understand that. But at the same time, it could cause people to think that this is not essential to the overall story when it absolutely is. Reception-wise, Capcom was back to its glory days. Code Veronica was met very positively pretty much across the board, with mostly high A's and 9 out of 10 grades, with praise being for the game's atmosphere, the graphics, CGI sequences, and it having a perfect Hollywood feel to it. It was, without a doubt, the best looking game in the series for the time. However you feel about the game itself, it's hard to deny that this was a top tier looking game for 2000. The original Code Veronica on the Dreamcast ended up being the second best selling game on the system, only behind Sonic Adventure. Even placing at number 2 though, it sold only a little over 1 million copies, which is still considerably less than RE1, 2, or 3. But Code Veronica X on the PlayStation 2 sold even better at over 1.5 million, which, again, was over a year after the game came out. As for me, this may be a bit of a hot take for some Resident Evil fans, but I've never loved Code Veronica. It is a good game and essential to the overall story, and has that classic RE style and all that, but it's an easy decision for me to place it below any of the first 3 games. I will agree that it looks better than any of those graphically, but there are just a lot of story and gameplay decisions that always ended up being more frustrating than fun. Without giving much away, there's a pretty notorious part in a plane that caused me to just quit altogether the first time I played it. If you're familiar with the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I was way too low on ammo and health at the time, and I could not get past this part. I didn't even play the game again until years later when I got it for the PS2. But a lot of the story for me is just way too goofy, although intentional. It certainly has its own feel to it, so I'll give it that, but it all comes across pretty awkward for me. With that said, this game does have its share of memorable moments, some that I actually do love, but I could never get fully behind the game as a complete package. It tries to balance slow-paced survival horror with action-heavy scenes, and sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it fails. That intro scene alone with Claire being in a John Woo movie should indicate whether this direction will be for you or not. I'm certainly not a Code Veronica hater, but it's nowhere near an overall favorite in the series for me. I would absolutely welcome a remake for this though if it ever happens. I feel like it has the potential to completely win me over, but we'll see. Since this is all we have for the time being, it's simply not a game that I love. I still like it more than Survivor though, so there's that. I'm sorry, it's just how I feel. Next time, we're going to be looking at a strange one, and actually one that I have never played to this day. It never got a North American release, but it acts as both a sequel to Resident Evil Survivor and a reimagining of Code Veronica of all things. Yet Capcom chose to blend together their last 2 releases into one game. Join me next time as we look at Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. Paraspectre will return.
Claire. Nice. Why don't you send your brother the coordinates and ask him to come help?
Thanks. I'll do that.
No way. He won't come. Believe me, I know.
What was that all about?
Yeah! Help me! Thanks to you.
Oh, I need those. Give them to me.
I have no idea what you're babbling about.
Oh? You must be one of Umbrella's lower level officers if you're in command of a backwater base like this one.
Why have you attacked this installation? Who do you work for? Have it your way, then. Welcome, Claire.
Oh yeah, that felt good.
Whatever.
Hey, this thing's empty. Ow! My back! You're heavier than you look. Time to test out my new toy. I pulled through without a scratch. But I thought that you needed a workout.
I despise Chris.
Whatever.